Hey, I'm Andy. This is the Church Basement. So I didn't see a lot of change in my life until one thing happened. And I'm not going to keep you guessing. Okay, I'm going to tell you right off the bat. Nothing really dramatically changed in my life until I had other guys in my life who knew me, who I let know me at a pretty deep level. Now, does that mean like nothing changed? No. Of course, things about me changed when I started following Jesus. Parts of my life changed. I learned a lot. For the first time in my life, I felt like, I had a moral compass. A lot of things changed about me, but I still had this sense, this feeling like I was the same old Andy. Now, if you can relate to that, awesome, keep watching. If you can't, you might be thinking like, hey, why didn't anything change in your life? It's maybe a red flag. What about spiritual disciplines and all these things that we're supposed to be doing as followers of Jesus? Were you doing that? Let me back up a little bit. I had been following Jesus probably 10 years. When I started following Jesus after college, like something went off in me. Like I was excited. I wanted to learn. I wanted to devote myself. And I did. I poured myself into all the things that you're told you need to do. I got super involved in my church, and after several years, got into a leadership position and led, supervised, was a pastor at a church, all this stuff. But yet, during that whole time, while some things in my life absolutely were changing, again, I had this sense like I'm still the same old Andy, struggling with the same old habits. Why don't things change? Why can't I change? What is going on? What am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? And I think a lot of guys struggle with this. We have this sense that something's wrong with us because we're not seeing any change. Now, when I say I was doing all the right things, I was, devoting myself and doing this, what do I mean? Well, was I reading scripture? I was reading scripture. I read scripture daily, the entire Bible. In fact, I had large chunks of scripture memorized. Romans 5, 6, 7, 8, I could just spit out. So I was reading scripture, okay? So it's not like I didn't know maybe what was right or what I should be doing. Well, what about my theology? I was in seminary, a good seminary, taking the classes, reading all the books, again, saturating myself in good doctrine, good theology. So again, it wasn't necessarily I didn't know what to do or what to think or what to believe that was necessarily causing me to stumble. There's something else. Well, what about prayer? What about spiritual disciplines? I prayed to God every day, in different ways. So I was praying to God. I was doing the different disciplines. I was practicing generosity. I was fasting occasionally. I was doing a lot of the stuff that, are described as spiritual disciplines. Not all of them, but quite a few. So what about my desires? Maybe just something was off in my heart. Like I didn't care. I cared. Trust me, I cared. I was frustrated with myself that things weren't changing. I cared quite a bit. In fact, as I'm describing this, I kind of related to what Paul writes about in Romans 7, where, he says, I have a desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. What do you say to that guy who has a desire to do all the right things, but yet does not have the ability? Does he need more desire? Clearly he doesn't. Does he not know what to do? Well, a couple verses early, it says, I delight in the law of God. He knows the law, yet he just can't do it. So how does all this relate to the big change in my life? Well, I finally got to a point where I had to let people in. I had to let guys know me. It's a long story. I've talked about it in other places, but the gist is when I started letting guys know who I was, what was going on in my life, my struggles, my feelings, my thoughts, the stuff that I'd been experiencing, what it was like to be me is how I like to describe it. When I started letting guys into my life and know this stuff, something happened. mainly shame started to dissipate as I let more guys know me. The shame that I had been carrying around for so long started to not feel so weighty. I also felt like, there are other people who know what it's like to be me. There's other guys who have been doing the same thing I've been doing, who have been struggling with the same thing I have been struggling with. So I'm not alone. I'm on this path, and it's not a solo journey. It's with other guys. That gave me a sense of encouragement and even a sense of I have support. I have people in my corner who are going to help me. So why is it that this was the big change? Am I saying that these other things weren't as powerful? Prayer isn't powerful. Reading scripture isn't powerful. Theology isn't powerful. The spiritual disciplines aren't powerful. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that before I had guys in my life, I was living in a state of isolation. And when you are in a state of isolation, I firmly believe that shame has a much better chance of getting its grip on you, of speaking lies into your life. And when you're in isolation, you have a much better chance of believing those lies. Shame hinders. Shame pushes us away from God, so we don't go to Him as prayer as often. Shame tells us lies, so those lies have an impact on the truth and what we're reading in Scripture or what we're learning in theology. So it's not so much that these practices aren't powerful. They are powerful. But when we live in isolation, that works against these different disciplines and these different practices. Isolation hinders us from trusting in God. When we're in isolation, we have a much better chance that shame is going to be influencing us. Shame, this sense of not measuring up, missing the mark, inadequacy, it convinces us to believe lies about ourselves. And when we're in isolation, we're more likely to believe those lies. So when we're in isolation, and if shame is doing its number on us, and it was absolutely doing a number on me, not only am I reading truths in Scripture, but I'm also, in a sense, telling myself a lot of lies. You see, in isolation, shame feeds you the lies, but then you kind of start to tell yourself the lies. You start to repeat the lies. You start to believe the lies. In isolation, on my good days, I can tell myself what's true. But on my bad days, I have a really hard time believing what's true about me. In fact, on my worst days, I'm usually saying the worst things to me about me. So I can read all the truth in Scripture that I want, but in shame, it's not always going to be received. When it comes to prayer, going to God, shame is this thing that makes us think, I can't approach God. I'm telling you, I know the gospel. I believe the gospel. I love the gospel. But when you're in shame, there's doubt. There's seeds of doubt that get sown. And you think, yeah, God might love me, but I'm not sure He likes me. I think He's disappointed. That hinders our prayer when we believe those lies. And then also, I just want to point out, I had guys in my life, small groups, a church community, but they did not know me. They didn't really know what Andy was like, what was going on in Andy's world. If you were to just go up to some of these people randomly and be like, tell me what it's like for Andy right now internally, like what's he struggling with, what's he going through, what's he battling, 0 people would have been able to give you an answer. That's the problem. Now, I got a handful of guys that can, to a degree, tell you a lot of that stuff. And that means I'm known. That's a measuring stick for being known. And being known means we're dealing with the shame, we're not in isolation, and we don't have that hindrance when we're diving into Scripture, we're encountering the truth. The truth is having its effect on us now because we're not in isolation. When I'm praying, I'm going to God more willingly, more openly, without fear of rejection, without fear of condemnation, because those truths are sinking in, but also the shame isn't, the lies of shame aren't blasting into my ear trying to convince me to do otherwise. And all the other things. When you take all the Christian practices and you put them into place and you do it with others, they're more effective. They're not hindered by isolation. They're enhanced by intimacy with others. God didn't create us to exist on our own. Jesus didn't mean for us to follow him alone. He created us to need each other. It's Genesis 2:18, right? It is not good for man to be alone. There is something about people that we experience God's grace in a different way when we're together rather than when we're on our own. It has nothing to do with God lacking power or Scripture lacking power or prayer lacking power. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is isolation is what's getting in the way of us experiencing that grace and receiving the benefits, really, of those disciplines in our life. So if you're listening to this, I'm really wondering if this is the thing that's got you stuck. This is the thing that's got you hung up. And if it's time for you to maybe deal with this so that you start to see that change in your life that you desperately want. Are you alone? Are you isolated? Can you let some guys into your life? Do you have any in your life? If you do, awesome. Start trusting them. Start taking baby steps. Let them know who you are. If not, you need to find guys. You need to be around guys because that is how we really experience growth. We grow together. And I really do think God will put the right people in your life. If you're willing and you want to take those steps, I believe God will put those people in your life. I pray he does. I hope he does. He did for me and changed everything.